Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody to our LHC Reach Out webinar. My name is Josie Gaitan and I work for Reach Out as a nonprofit organization in the Inland Empire. I would like to say this webinar is going to be in English today, but everybody's welcome. Today we will be talking about how to talk to your kids about sexual health, which will highlight the importance of talking to your kids about sexual and reproductive health and positive long-term effects. So today with us, we have a very special speaker, and joining us today with us is Fabiola Mercado from Parenthood, Orange County and San Bernardino counties. So Fabiola, welcome. And I am very happy to have you with us and give us all this new information that we all are anxious to hear. Thank you very much. And the floor is all yours, Fabiola.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And welcome everybody. Let me get my presentation set up. All right. So welcome again. Thanks for joining. As mentioned, we will be discussing really how to talk about sexual health with your kids, whether you are a parent, a caregiver, or in some cases, an older sibling, or anyone who really looks after a young person in their life. We're gonna talk a little bit about why it's so important, learn some tips and tricks for having these conversations, and hopefully answer some questions that you all might have about really how to get these conversations going. So again, my name is Fabiola. I am the Community Education Manager for Planned Parenthood that covers all of Orange and San Bernardino counties. And as Community Education Manager, I oversee the educational programs that focus on comprehensive sex ed. We do education for youth, for parents and professionals. I myself provide most of the parent education in English or Spanish. So if this is at all of interest for any other groups you might think of, in either language, you can always reach out to me for a special request. All right, so I discussed some of these objectives already, but just to review one more time, we'll learn and have a greater understanding about the importance in communicating about these topics with your kids. Become more aware of what actually influences youth's attitudes and beliefs, and eventually actions revolving around reproductive and sexual health. And last but not least, review some strategies that can help improve communication between parents, caregivers, and adolescents. Before we get into all of the information and content, I do like to start off with just some group agreements. I want to set the floor and say that this is a safe space, meaning that we are acknowledging that everyone here is coming in with different levels of comfort, with different levels of experience. There might be some of you who have had these conversations already and are super, super comfortable with discussing these topics. And there might be some of you that haven't had these conversations yet and maybe aren't as comfortable. So we're all here to learn, and I encourage all questions during the presentation. So anything you might have, it's pretty likely if you have a question, somebody else might have a similar question as well. And get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like I mentioned, not everyone is as comfortable talking about these topics or has experience. So really sink into the information. Think about how you would apply some of these things in your life with your young people. And we're going to assume positive intent, and that just means acknowledging we're all here to learn. If you don't know exactly how to ask a question, just ask in the best way you can. And if rephrasing needs to be done, we can just do that as we go. And you can submit your questions via chat. That's usually the easiest way, and I'll kind of keep monitoring the chat. If any questions come through, you can ask them throughout the presentation or at the end. You can also send them privately if you would rather. And we can keep it anonymous. Okay, so let's just get started with a quick icebreaker. I'd like to learn a little bit about you and your experience with this topic. So just take a moment to remember back to your own first experiences learning about sexual health. So think back, what were those messages that came about? Who did they come from? When? So were you at school? Were you at home? What was the topic? Were you learning about puberty? Did you start learning about romantic relationships? Did something pop on TV and all of a sudden you were talking about other topics related to sexuality and sexual health? Or in some cases, did you not really get too much sex ed growing up? If you want to share, you can go ahead and type it in to the chat. And I see we have some shares that say friends, which is a very, very common one to learn about sexual health and sexuality from friends. Because really, as we're growing up, everyone's just kind of learning and experiencing different things. And it's sometimes the easiest to talk to other friends that might be going through the same thing. Puberty in 5th grade health ed class. So that's also a very common one, that puberty education is done in schools. The quality of the education really depends. Some people get full on, like very interactive, in-depth puberty education through school, and some people get a video. So it can really range in your experience learning about puberty in school and can be very different from others. I have another one, health class, very common. And then movies, TV shows, video games, music, so a lot of media. And as we know, media has a lot of sexual health messages that come across from just viewing these things that we view in everyday life. So thanks so much for sharing. Anybody else who wants to share, just go ahead and type that into the chat. And these are all very common responses. So I get a lot of school. So learning about sexual health through usually puberty classes, like the first thing covered in like a school setting. I also get a lot of similar responses from TV, from friends, very popular from friends. And I also get a lot of messages and a lot of responses that people didn't really get that message or those conversations from really anyone. And because this is a Latino Health Collaborative, when I am doing my Spanish presentations, most Latinos will say that it wasn't really talked about in their house. It was something very taboo that no one really wanted to touch. It was something very private. And you kind of learned about it as you went, right? And that's a very, very common experience that's not just limited to the Latino culture, but is very common in that culture and can also be found in a lot of other cultures. So one more, sex ed in middle school. Yes, middle school is also another place. As a teenager, my own exploration, magazines, Cosmo, nothing appropriate for a teenager. Yes, and we're going to talk about that. So thank you. Thank you all for sharing. And I just want you all to really consider your own experiences learning about sexual health and how that has shaped how you feel about it now. Whether it has made you really comfortable talking about it now, or it's something that's still very private and it's not really talked about too much. And then maybe think, what are some of the experiences you had and what do you want to be similar for your youth, your teen, whoever you have in your life, and what do you want to have different for them? So just things to think about as we're going through the presentation. All right, so we've talked about ways in which youth receive information about sexual health, right? Where do they get their information from? We heard a lot of school, a lot of media, friends, and there was actually a study that was done where they asked youth between the ages of 12 and 19, where do you get your information from? And these were some of the top responses. So religious leaders, if they are a part of any a religious affiliated group, or even like after school sports or any other type of group where there is like an adult in charge. So it could be religious leader, coach, counselor, whatever it may be. Those are places where youth might get their information from, right? Somebody that they feel comfortable going to, or somebody that they might just see as a role model and kind of take some messages that way. Movies, of course, were already mentioned. So lots of sexual health messages that come across the movies. Hopefully parents is another source. Social media, friends, siblings, music, TV, internet, of course, is one of the top ones, and school. So these are all just some. Of course, there's more places. We would have normally seen like books and magazines out here, but it's a little old school for kids these days. It's not really as popular anymore. So these are some of the common ways that youth have identified recently. So out of all of these different forms of information, different sources, which one do you think has the biggest influence on teens' decisions about sex? So which one do you think has the most influence on their attitudes, their beliefs, and then eventually their decisions that are made around sexual health, around sex? So let me show you the options again. Considering all of these options, which one do you think is number one? You can go ahead and type it into the chat. And it's just a best guess, what everyone kind of thinks would be the first or the top. And we see a lot of friends. Very common, friends, parents, or internet. Yeah, definitely. Internet has become huge. And of course, now everyone has access to the internet. Social media, yeah. So lots of options. And in some cases, it can be very different depending on the teen. But when that group of teens were asked that very question, the majority of them identified parents as the biggest influence over their decisions about sex. And usually when I share this response, a lot of times parents are like, no way, they don't listen to me. Like there's no way that parents are the biggest influence. But I have data to prove it. So here's the data that they collected. It has the age ranges separated into two, from 12 to 15 and 16 to 19. And in both age groups, you could see that parents were voted number one as the most influence over their decisions. 52% in ages 12 to 15 and 32% in the 16 to 19 age range. So pretty large percentages. In second place, of course, as many of you all identified, friends come in second place. And parents beat out friends quite a lot, like by a lot, in the 12 to 15 age range. So 17% said friends. And as they start to get older into the 16 to 19 age range, the influence that friends have on their decisions starts to increase. Parents still stay in the number one spot, but now we have a very, very close percentage. So 28% compared to 32, only a 5% difference. And then everything else falls after that, and it's considerably lower. So we can definitely say that parents and friends are the top two influencers, but parents is the very, very top one. It's number one influence. The trick is that parents have that influence when they actually have these conversations with their youth, right? So it's not going to be much influence if a parent or caregiver never talks about these topics, right? Because what kind of influence is that? The influence comes from those conversations that are open and honest and provide accurate information to our teens. Something else I would like to point out, as you can see, as they get older, they start to lose a little bit of that influence. And that just goes to show that if possible, starting these conversations earlier can have a big effect and can have more of an influence and more of a probability of teens holding on to those messages and values and beliefs that will influence their decisions longer and later into life. So there's a misconception that you don't want to start having these conversations too early, but there are age appropriate ways to have these conversations and start talking about sexuality in, like I said, age appropriate ways, so that you can start having these earlier and earlier, and you can start building that sense of trust and that relationship where they feel comfortable coming to their parent or caregiver for that information. And I'll break it down a little bit more in a couple slides. So similarly, another study showed that when teens have parents who talk to them about sex, birth control, preventing STIs, everything related to sexual and reproductive health, they are more likely to wait longer before becoming sexually active. And because they're waiting longer and they have the information, when they do decide to become sexually active, they are more likely to use protection. Because they're using protection, they're more likely to avoid unintended pregnancies and STIs. So we can see that simply by having these conversations and giving teens the tools that they need to make safe decisions for themselves when the time comes, it has very, very positive long-term effects. There's a myth out there that a lot of parents believe, and sometimes, it's been around for a really long time, where the belief is, if you're talking to them about these topics too early, it's like you're giving them permission, like you're encouraging them to do these things. But as you can see, and studies have shown, it's actually the complete opposite. And it makes sense when teens know how to stay safe and talk about these topics with parents, and it's not a mysterious, scary thing that they're not prepared for. They're more confident in their decisions, and they're more confident in being able to say no in situations where they might be pressured, or know why it's important to wait a little bit longer. So a lot of positive effects that just simply having these conversations and providing them with that information can have long-term and into their young adult life. On the other hand, in relation to teens also have a lot of reasons why they don't want to talk about these topics with their parents or caregivers. And they're pretty reasonable topics once you see what they are. So here are just some of the biggest reasons why this is specific to 15 to 17-year-olds don't want to talk to their parents or caregivers about sexual health. So the very top reason, 83% said that they worry about their parents' reaction, which, it depends on what kind of parents you are and what kind of parents you had. But I totally relate to this statement, and I feel like a lot of adults also relate to this. As a teen, the reaction towards bringing up this topic was always a little scary. So definitely rated as one of the top concerns that teens have. 80% said that they worry their parents will think that they're having sex if they're bringing up these topics. Also a very, very real concern for them. 78% said that they were plain out just embarrassed to talk about it. 77 didn't know how to bring it up, so just didn't really understand how to work it into a conversation. And 64% said they didn't think that their parents understood. And these are just some of the top reasons that youth don't want to talk about these topics or don't bring these topics up with their parents, which if you really look at a lot of these reasons, they have really simple solutions, right? So it all has to do with how the parent or the caregiver opens up those doors for communication, right? So if their biggest concern is the parent or caregiver's reaction, then starting those conversations and making taking that first step, opening those doors, can already eliminate that one and a lot of these other barriers that they feel exist. So just that it's important for parents and caregivers to know on the other end, what are some of the concerns that youth have about these topics. And talking about sexual health isn't always easy. As we mentioned, it's easy to say, oh yeah, talk about it. Just talk about it with your youth. But when you're in the moment and you're bringing it up, and if you've never talked about it before, it could be something pretty scary, pretty uncomfortable. Maybe you don't know how to say it. Maybe you're not comfortable with some of the words, or maybe it's just awkward. And that's totally, totally normal. The important thing is that you're making that effort, you're starting that conversation, and you're opening those doors for communication. And hopefully some of the tips that I share as we keep moving forward will help kind of ease a little bit of that uncomfortability ability and help with starting those conversations. Before we get into all of those, it's important to also acknowledge that when we're talking about sexual health, and especially in a comprehensive way, when I say sexual health, when I say sexuality, it's not just talking about sex and about reproduction. Sexuality and sexual health includes so much more than that. And these are just some of the things that sexual health encompasses. So things like learning about a body, about bodies and the anatomy and how reproduction happens. You would be surprised how many middle school and even high school classrooms we go into where they still have a lot of questions about reproductive anatomy, just anatomy in general, and also, how pregnancies happen. There are a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myths that still exist around pregnancy, and we still get a ton of questions. Questions about like, can a person become pregnant if, and then fill in the blank. It could be almost anything. We've heard almost everything in there. Lots of questions about gravity, about hot tubs, about pools, about urinating right after. So there's a lot of questions around pregnancy and myths that exist around pregnancy that youth still have. So it's really important for you to understand how pregnancy happens, how the reproductive system works, and just anatomy in general. Because if they don't understand how pregnancies happen, how are they able, or how should they be able to prevent a pregnancy from happening once they decide to be sexually active? So very important stuff. But more than just that, learning about safety and puberty, about consent, what consent is, what it looks like, what it feels like, online safety, boundaries, gender, really just learning about bodies and how to be comfortable in your own body, how to respect other people's bodies and boundaries, and even what a healthy relationship should look like and how to identify healthy or unhealthy relationships. Body image, understanding sexual orientation, understanding gender. So as you can see, and many, many more, as you can see, sexual health is so much more than just the little pieces that we sometimes focus on. So talking about all of these topics is really important if we're doing a comprehensive approach to sexual health. And it can even be easier to start with some of the topics that you might be a little more comfortable with versus jumping right into some of the bigger topics that require a little more comfortability and like trust to start talking about those. Okay, so I keep saying, talk to your kids, but when? So when do we start talking about sexual health? When can we start talking? And here I have 4 categories. I have early childhood from 0 to 3, late childhood 4 to 8, early adolescence 9 to 12, and adolescence 13 to 18. So out of these 4 categories, these 4 age groups, which one do you think is when we should start talking about sexuality in some way with our kids or the young people in our lives, where we're more of a caregiver guardian type of relationship? So go ahead and type it into the chat, whichever age group you think is the most appropriate. Oops. All right. And I have some guesses: late childhood, early adolescence, right? So 4 to 8, 9 to 12, a couple more 9 to 12s, which is very common because puberty. Okay, and 0 to 3, we should start talking about body anatomy. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so it's very, very common to get responses of early adolescence because we think puberty, that's when we need to start talking about these topics. Somebody commented 9 to 12 might be too late. And you're right. I mean, it's never, I won't say too late. It's never too late to start talking about these topics. Even if your child is 20 years old, maybe you're not starting from the very beginning, but even at 20 or even as an older adult, Simply even just having conversations about how they can always come to you for advice or for any questions that they might have is always a great thing. When we're talking about these age groups, if you're starting from whichever age group you think is appropriate to start talking about this, the answer really is from early childhood. So from the moment we're born as sexual beings, right? And we start learning about sexuality. As we've kind of discussed, sexuality is more than just puberty. It's more than just reproduction. It's about just everything, your body, relationships, all of it. So here I'll show you how, even if we don't know it, young children are starting to learn about sexuality and about who they are. So for early childhood, and again, this is just an estimate. So this is not set in stone. So sorry, hold on one second. So in early adolescence, babies are even starting to learn about things like love and trust. So they cry and they know that somebody is going to come and hug them and make them feel better. And that is how they're starting to learn. Sorry, one second. Sorry about that. So even as babies, they're starting to learn about love and trust through knowing that someone is going to come and make them feel better, going to come and feed them and take care of them. And so what does that have to do with sexuality? That is really the building blocks of relationships and knowing what a healthy relationship is and knowing, really how to tell what unhealthy relationships are later in life. So those are just the building blocks. They also start to become exploring their bodies and curiosity between genders. So they start to notice the differences between different bodies. And that is a part of sexuality, really understanding bodies and differences. And they start to become a little bit more curious. So they might start asking questions around this time, like, oh, why do they have this? Or why are we different? They're also starting to learn about things like gender roles and identity. So gender roles comes with, what kind of clothes they wear, what kind of toys they play with, what kind of colors they like. And there are some gender roles is really a societal thing. So it will have, what society expects of a person based on their gender, but then it'll also have a little bit of what they actually like. So, that's when favorite colors come up, favorite toys come up, and they're starting to learn more about themselves and their identity. And that is definitely a part of sexuality. As we move on to the later childhood, they start to become a little older. They start to notice that bodies are different sizes, shapes, and colors. And as they start going to school and start meeting new people, they start to really notice the differences between people. And, this is a great time to really talk about, even start having little conversations about body image and how everyone's unique. And that is so special, right? So giving messages of body image in a very positive way, kind of building them up and preparing them for puberty, which is a whole nother world. They should also, around this age, start knowing more about their bodies and learning that their bodies belong to them. So this relates to safety. Really understanding what is good touch and what's bad touch. So teaching them, it's okay for someone to high five. It's okay for someone to tap on the shoulder, but these are some areas where it's not okay, right? And it'll differ depending on families, but really teaching them what places are okay and not okay. Family members' roles and duties. So who's allowed to give them a bath? Who's allowed to do this? Who's allowed to do that? And really having them understand everyone's roles and what's appropriate and not appropriate. And this all, unfortunately, no one likes to talk about or likes to think about bad things happening to young kids, but it does happen. And safety is such a big part, knowing about consent and really understanding that their body is theirs and what to do if something were to happen that was inappropriate, how to identify what's inappropriate, and what to do, who to talk to, what to do if it does happen. And just by having those little pieces can help prevent a lot of situations that deal with safety and unfortunate things that happen. And then knowing how to develop, maintain, and if necessary, end friendships. And this is continuing on from what they have started learning about relationships, learning about love and trust. As they move on to early adolescence, that's from 9 to 12 years old, that is when good old puberty typically will hit. So learning about puberty changes is a really important thing during this stage. And it really depends on when the parents went through puberty can affect or can have kind of a little bit of a gauge on when the child would go through puberty. So if parents went through puberty a little earlier, then maybe having that conversation a little earlier. It's important to talk about changes before they happen. So that way the child is prepared, they know exactly what's going to happen, or a gist of what's going to happen. They're not scared. And sometimes they're even more excited about the changes that are going to happen. And then, of course, as they get older, conversations about things like sexual abuse, unhealthy relationships, and what to do can be built upon. So expanding on what they already learned as they were younger and slowly starting to add more and more information. Since now they're a little bit older, they can understand some of that more in-depth information about all of these topics. And then because puberty has hit and hormones are floating through the body, talking about dating and family values regarding dating is also a good place within this 9 to 12 year age range, because this is usually when crushes will start, where romantic feelings will start, and they start to have more interest in dating. And then last but not least, as they get older, 13 to 18, right about, body image starts to become more of a concern, because people are going through puberty and bodies are changing, and some bodies are changing faster and some are slower, and everybody's body is different. So body image starts to become a concern, and this is a really great topic to talk to with our teens. Romantic relationships will typically develop around this age, if that is allowed. And because they've gone through puberty, there is now a possibility of pregnancy or impregnating. And I like to include this piece in there to make sure that they know that it's okay to wait to have sex. Not everyone is doing it. There's a big misconception among teens that everyone's doing it, everyone's sexually active, because they see so many messages on media. They see, maybe some friends talking about it, kids joking about it, but in reality, it's not happening everywhere, and it's not that common. So it's important for them to know the realities of it so that they don't feel pressured into those situations. And as we've kind of built on, once we're having these conversations and giving them the tools and the information that they need to make those healthy choices, they are more likely to feel confident waiting longer before becoming sexually active. So hopefully that just kind of breaks down the sexuality as youth develop, and different topics that can be appropriate depending on the age. All right, so what do youth want? They really just want someone who listens without judgment or blame. They want someone who's going to provide the accurate information and resources, and someone who takes their questions and problems seriously. Especially as adults, if you remember being a teen, sometimes the problems that you had or the issues, the concerns that you had at that age, now you think about them and you're like, oh my gosh, that wasn't even anything. But as a teen, it is a big concern and it is a big deal. So even if a teen comes to you with, this concern that you're like, in 2 days, you won't even care about that. It's important to still listen and take their concerns seriously, because to them, it's very, very serious. And then what can parents do? Here are just some tips of things that you can do when talking to your youth. So be open and honest. Sounds super easy and simple, but it could be a little harder than you think. So open and honest means giving accurate information. So that means, if your 5-year-old comes and asks, where do babies come from? And not immediately saying, oh, the stork comes, or how did the baby get in there? Oh, I swallowed a watermelon seed, right? You hear all of these easy way outs, which is, a way to kind of postpone talking about it. However, the best approach is to provide an answer in an age-appropriate way. Usually as you're younger, give a little bit more of a general age-appropriate response, and then usually they're satisfied with that. If they keep asking more and more questions, then give a little bit more, a little bit more until they're satisfied. But being open and honest is definitely the best approach, especially with older kids, with middle school and high school. Google is so accessible to our older kids. So if they feel like you're not being honest, they will go and Google it themselves. And Google is great. Having access to information is great. However, not everything on Google is correct. So what we want is for them to feel comfortable coming to us and trusting our answers so that they don't go and search it on their own. Have frequent conversations instead of one big one. So we've heard of, the talk, like, okay, you're 15 now, we got to have the talk. Or in my mom's case, it was, I think, the day before her wedding. She's like, okay, we need to have the talk. So it's been part of like a culture thing that we wait until our teens or our kids are a little bit older to talk to them about these things. But as we've learned, it's important to start early, and it's easier and so much better to start early and start with topics that are a little easier and then work your way up. And by then you have that confidence and you hopefully have that trust from them where they're going to come to you and ask you the questions that they have, or even bring up, what happened at school or what they heard from someone else. Start early if you can, but it's never too late. And I love to expand on this one. Explain the why. So we're all super used to just saying, do this, don't do this, just listen to me, I'm the adult. And we probably got that growing up from our parents and our caregivers. But what really makes a difference is explaining the why. So not just saying, you can't date, explaining why you would like them to wait until they're older to date and having a conversation with them. When a person, and I don't even say teens because it applies to adults as well, when a person understands the why behind the statement or the rule, then it's so much easier for them to take it in and to be okay with it and understand why it's there and abide by it. So explaining the why. And then share your hopes and dreams for them and listen to their own goals. It could also be really helpful to, maybe work their goals into why there are some of the rules that you have for them. So ask them, what do you want to do after high school? What are your goals? And if they say, I want to go to, or not everyone goes to college, we'll say, I want to open up my own bakery and I want to run my own business and I want to, bake and sell cakes and grow my business all day. Okay, great. Like that's a great goal. Here are some things that are going to help you along the way. This is why I think it's important for you to wait before you start dating. This is why we're not allowing dating until later on. I want you to focus on this, this, and this. So those are some ways that asking them what their goals and really having a conversation versus just lecturing can have a really big difference on how they accept the information. And most importantly, practice. So it could be really hard at first if you've never had these conversations before, but the more you practice, the more you start having these small conversations, the easier it'll get. And in case you do get any questions that you feel are a little difficult to answer, here are just some quick tips for how to answer some of those questions. I can't give you a specific question because it would take so long to go through every single question that a youth would have. I still get asked questions that I've never been asked before by youth. So here are just some general tips on how to take in and how to respond to questions. So let's say you get a shocking question, right? You're doing dishes, you're not ready, you're just kind of thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow. And your kid comes in and asks you something about sex and you're just not prepared for it. You haven't really thought about how you would handle it. This is how, these are some tips that can help. So first, take a second, take a breath, relax. You don't have to immediately respond. And taking a breath and taking a second will help just kind of the overall feel and vibe of that moment feel a lot more relaxed and acceptable. So relax, make sure that your face is not reacting, right? So a lot of people react with their face. Make sure that you're relaxed. You're not showing any type of expressions. You're not showing that you're in distress. So overall, just a very comforting, relaxing posture. And then the first thing that you could do is affirm the question. It's very, very simple. You could just say, oh, that's a great question. That already will help them feel more comfortable. They'll feel like, okay, it's okay that I'm asking this question. She's totally fine with it. He's totally fine with it. And then see what they already know. So this can help really break down what it is they're actually asking. It can also show you how much they already know, whether you just need to add information or it's completely wrong and you need to start all over. And it also buys you time. Buys you time on thinking about how you want to respond. So, oh, that's a great question. What do you think? Right? It'd be a really easy way to ask that. Then based off the response, you can add to the response or you can tell them why that's incorrect. And then answer the question in an age-appropriate, simple, and honest manner. And after you've answered the question, simply ask if they understood, if they have any more questions, and then encourage them to come back if they do. So altogether, it would just be, oh, that's a great question. What do you think? Provide the answer. Does that make sense? Do you have any other questions? Okay, well, you know that if you ever do have any other questions, you can always come to me. And that can really help leave the door open so that they do feel comfortable coming back and asking those questions if they have any more. All right, so hopefully that information was helpful. I do want to end off with some resources for you all. And I'll come back. I think I had one question in the chat box, so I'll come back to that right after I'm done here. So the first thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of is a law called the California Healthy Youth Act, CHIA for short. And this law is state mandated education. So it requires comprehensive sex ed be taught at least once in middle school and once in high school. I realize this is the 4th session, so you might have already learned about this law from other sessions that were done with this group. But just as another reminder, if you do have a child in public, middle school, or high school, you can easily reach out to the school or the teacher. It's usually either the science teacher or the PE teacher that does this education. And just ask when education is taking place, what they're using. You can review. You have the legal right to review the information that's going to be shared. And it makes it a super, super easy way to work in these conversations at home. So if you know that your child is learning about birth control on Monday after school, you can say, oh, I heard that you had a birth control presentation today. So what did you learn? Easy peasy. There you go. You bringing up birth control, and then that is an easy segue into what they learned during the day, and then you can fill in your own information. So remember, in schools and during any of our presentations, it's all fact-based education. So there's no values, there's no recommendations that are shared during these presentations. So it's really up to parents and caregivers at home to fill in those holes and talk about what your family values are regarding all of these topics so that youth have that understanding. And here are just some resources, some websites that are really helpful that touch on really all topics related to sexual and reproductive health. So Planned Parenthood is a really broad one. There's tons of topics, and there's a parent page that breaks it down by age. So if you are struggling with more of the language piece, like how do I explain this to them? Planned Parenthood could be a really good resource, our parent page on there, and it's English and Spanish. And then these other websites touch on different topics, on healthy relationships, on videos on all kinds of topics, on Amaze, and so much more. So if you want to screenshot this, it's a really good place to start. And then last but not least, we do have a parent and caregiver Let's Talk series this month. So October is Let's Talk month. It is a month that encourages conversations around sexual health with youth. So we are having our second session. We just had our first session yesterday on this topic. Session 2 is next Wednesday. It's in English and Spanish, and it's going to revolve around how to talk to your kids about safer social media. So things to look out for, and then tips on how to make it safer for them. And then our third session will be about puberty. So if you have any young kiddos that are about that age where puberty is about to hit and you need to start having these conversations, session 3 can be really helpful in just having some things to think about when preparing for that puberty talk. So if you are interested in registering, you can just hold up your camera on your smartphone and put it up to this QR code on the side, and it should pop up a link to our events page, and then you can register on there. All right, and thank you so much. Let me go back to the comments really quick. The dog agrees, yes, yes. She always barks at the worst times, but she does agree. How can we do it? Are there books or any other tools? Yes, so I'm assuming this has to do about just how to talk about sexual health with your kids. There are so many tools. So it's also important to know that every child is different, right? And you are going to be the best teacher and the expert on what your child, how your child learns best and how you communicate with them. So there are some kids that are super open. You can have conversations with them and they are totally down to talk. They're like, yes, I'm experiencing this. Yes, I have questions about this. But we know that there are some kiddos that are a little shyer about topics and don't really want to have that face-to-face. And in those cases, there are tons of books that are really great. Videos can be really great. That amaze.org has really great videos for all age ranges that touch on so many different topics. So even just watching a video together and then discussing afterwards can be a great way to start conversations without, with getting rid of a little bit of that uneasiness for them at the beginning. And then books, like I said, there's so many types of books. It just depends on the age range, but you could easily search online. I think Planned Parenthood also has recommendations for books, and it might even be broken down into age groups. Has someone agreed that knowing what your students are learning is a strong point? Yes, make sure you are informed and you know when they're getting the education and also how they're receiving it, like what kind of education they're getting. Education is supposed to be very unbiased. So it's important to make sure that the curriculum that they're using is not biased and the teacher is not providing any type of biased education. Right. Oh, and so it looks like for the first comment, it was for a 6-year-old for books and tools. Yeah, there's tons. If you go onto the Planned Parenthood website, there is under the education tab, there's a section for parents, and you can go to the elementary school age section, and it'll have tons of topics to talk about with your 6-year-old and really easy language to use with them. Okay, you want to screenshot the resources? Yes, of course. There you go. Anybody wants to screenshot it? There it is. And thank you so much. Hopefully you got some useful information from this, and you have any questions, you can always reach out, and I'd be happy to answer any of those or provide this presentation for any other group.
Thank you, Fabiola. This was very, very good information you shared with us. We learned a lot. Well, I learned a lot. It's been really interesting. You guys have been bringing something different every week, and I appreciate for you guys to be coming. I think your last one will be next week, and we'll send out the information of what this topic's going to be about, because I did not get it. Sorry, and I apologize. But they've been very interesting. I mean, we've learned a lot here at Reach Out, and I hope all our audience have learned also. You have been bringing different information and very good information that we've all learned. But I want to thank everybody for being here. And if you guys are interested in, if you guys have something that you guys want to share with the community, with partners, and you want to do a presentation here at our webinar, just please send me an email and or give me a phone call, and I'll be happy to put you in the agenda to come and do your presentation. So I would be very honored if you guys would call me or email me and come and do a presentation. But I want to thank everybody for attending. And if you don't have any other questions, anybody would like to say something, you guys are, it's open. You guys are welcome to just speak up and say anything if you guys want to tell Fabiola anything before we go on. No? Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Fabiola, for bringing us all that good information, a lot of good information that a lot of resources. So I just want to thank everybody for attending our LHC webinar, and we hope to see you guys next week, the same time, the same on Thursday. Thank you very much, and everybody have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.